Willow Creek was the kind of suburban neighborhood that prided itself on quiet perfection. Lawns were trimmed like velvet carpets. Front porches were polished with the shine of routine, and wind chimes scattered soft notes through the summer air. It was early July, the season when Oregon's roses bloomed fat and fragrant beneath the warm Portland sun. On one end of the cul-de-sac stood a house painted a muted gray. It wasn't unusual in its design: white trim, a porch light, a small mailbox with a dent on one side. What was unusual was the stillness. While other houses carried the echo of laughter, barking dogs, and television noise, the gray house remained eerily sealed. Curtains were always drawn. No toys cluttered the yard. It was a place that seemed to hold its breath. Elena Morales, who lived next door, noticed the silence the way a gardener notices a patch of soil where nothing grows. She was a woman in her mid-40s with silver threads in her dark hair and hands shaped by years of pruning and planting. Her own yard was a riot of color, a living thing that softened the edges of her solitude. That afternoon, Elena knelt among her rose bushes, trimming dead leaves, breathing in the rich scent of soil. She was so focused on her work that at first she didn't see the boy standing behind the fence. It was only when a flicker of movement caught her eye that she looked up and froze. A small figure stood partially hidden behind a hedge in the yard of the gray house. His shirt was oversized sleeves hanging past his wrists, and his pale face seemed almost translucent under the sun. He didn't move, didn't wave. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. Elena's heart gave a strange, tight beat. She lifted her hand slowly, offering a tentative wave. The boy flinched, his body jerking like a startled bird. Then he stepped closer, his voice breaking the air between them in a whisper so fragile Elena thought she'd imagined it. "She locks us in the basement." The garden shears slipped from Elena's hand and landed in the dirt with a muted thud. The world around her, the hum of sprinklers, the drone of bees, seemed to fall away. She stared at him, breath caught her mind, refusing to process the words. The boy's hazel eyes darted toward the house behind him. A beige curtain shifted for just a second, like a breath sucked in. Then, just as quickly, it stilled. Kit. The boy's name was Noah Whitfield. Elena knew it because she'd overheard his mother say it once sharply, like a reprimand. She had also seen a slightly older girl, Lily, hovering near him in the past, but always from a distance. In the days that followed the whisper, Elena became acutely aware of every detail around the gray house. While other homes had swing sets and chalk drawings scattered on their driveways, theirs remained sterile. No laughter spilled from the windows, no clatter of plates or music. Once, while watering her roses, Elena glimpsed a purple band around Noah's waist as he stumbled and fell. It was faint, like the shadow of a handprint, or the bruise left by something wrapped too tightly. A cold wave of memory swept through Elena. She saw her younger self, small and frightened, standing at the top of a staircase, while her mother's voice cut through the air like a blade. Not physical violence, no. The punishments had been silent, calculated. A slammed door, a refusal to speak for days. Elena had learned early that pain came in many forms. The thought of another child enduring something similar made her throat ache. She told herself she might be overreacting. Maybe Noah was just shy. Maybe the bruise had an innocent explanation. But the whisper, "She locks us in the basement," clung to her like the smell of smoke after a fire. That night, Elena barely slept. The gray house remained dark, save for a single flickering light in the upstairs hall. She lay awake, listening to the quiet, imagining a small body curled in the dark beneath that house. By the next afternoon, Elena had decided to act, though she told herself it was only a neighborly gesture. She baked a batch of chocolate chip cookies, though her hands trembled as she measured the flour. Carrying the plate, she crossed the 20 steps to the Whitfields' porch. The mailbox, with its dent, seemed to glare at her. She rang the doorbell and waited, heartbeat loud in her ears. The door swung open. Candace Whitfield stood framed in the doorway, her blonde hair perfectly arranged, her floral dress crisp and summery. Her smile was wide, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Elena," said her own smile stiff. "I'm Elena from next door. I thought you and the kids might like some cookies." Behind Candace, Elena caught a glimpse of Noah's blue shirt. His face blanched at the sight of her. Candace's hand landed on his shoulder nails, digging slightly into the fabric. How polite, Candace said, her tone warm and tight at once. But really, that's not necessary. Elena's gaze shifted past her. Down the hallway at the very end was a door with a heavy chain and padlock. Before she could fully register what she was seeing, Candace shifted her body, slightly blocking the view. "Well," Elena said carefully, "maybe Noah could come by sometime and help me with the garden. I love teaching children about flowers." Candace's smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "My son doesn't bother the neighbors," she said flatly. From somewhere inside the house came a soft, muffled sob. Elena felt it like a physical blow. She forced a brittle smile, nodded, and turned away. Tigged. That night, Elena made chamomile tea, turned on her record player, and adjusted the thermostat. None of it mattered. Sleep eluded her. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Noah's face pale and tense and heard the whisper, "She locks us in the basement." Her mind drifted backward to another house long ago, to her younger sister Letty curled in bed after their mother's silent rage. To the vow Elena had made to herself back then, "If I ever see someone hurting like this, I won't look away." She rose from bed and moved to the couch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Outside, the gray house loomed like a sealed tomb. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, like a held breath that never released. Elena whispered into the darkness as if making a promise to both Noah and her younger self, "I won't look away this time." The shed. By morning, determination had replaced fear. Elena retrieved a small voice recorder her daughter had given her last Christmas, originally meant for saving recipes. She placed it discreetly behind a cluster of flower pots near the fence that separated her yard from the Whitfields. It wouldn't capture much, but maybe it would catch something: footsteps, a cry, a name. Hours passed. As evening settled, Elena retrieved the recorder and listened with trembling hands. At first, only static and wind. Then faintly the sound of a door creaking, a muffled sob, a sharp, angry voice, indistinct but unmistakably harsh, then a crash followed by silence. Elena's throat tightened. She clutched the recorder as if it were a lifeline. That night she dialed the number for Child Protective Services. A recorded voice greeted her, followed by a menu of options. Her fingers were slick with sweat as she pressed through. When prompted, she spoke clearly, her voice breaking only once. "I'd like to report possible child endangerment." She gave the address, the children's names described the bruises, the whisper, the locked door. "Thank you for your call," the operator said, distracted and neutral. "A caseworker will follow up within 72 hours. 3 days. Elena's voice cracked. "He's in the basement now, unless the child is in immediate physical danger." "He is," Elena cried, but the line clicked and the call ended with a mechanical tone. Elena sat very still, phone cold in her hand. 3 days. It felt like an eternity. Dehors. The next morning, Willow Creek bustled with the gentle rhythm of normal life. A teenager zipped by on a skateboard. Mrs. Lee's cat prowled lazily across a sunlit porch. Only Elena felt the weight of what she knew. She moved through her house like a ghost staring at the gray house next door. She checked the recorder again. Static. Then faint crying. Then silence. Elena opened her journal and began to write, hands shaking Noah. 6 years old. Thin. Long sleeves in summer. Statement, she locks us in the basement. Evidence bruise around waist. House windows always shut. Emotional reaction, fear, guilt. At the bottom she wrote, child safety first. My fear second. She closed the notebook and looked out at her roses blooming brilliant and defiant against the cracked soil. A whisper had started this, and until someone listened, she wouldn't stop. Ashashi. If this story has gripped you so far, remember to subscribe and stay with me. The journey is just beginning, and sometimes the most powerful stories start with a whisper. The mailbox on Elena's porch had a habit of swallowing small truths. That morning, it offered one up shyly as if unsure of its own courage, a note folded twice, edges softened by the press of a child's palm. The handwriting crawled across the ruled paper, hesitant, uneven, determined. It named the dark without embellishment. It asked for help without ornament. It trembled, and it did not apologize. Elena read it once, and the kitchen seemed to lean toward her chairs and countertops, holding their breath. The words were simple, and in their simplicity they had the weight of a verdict. Somewhere across a strip of grass and a fence that remembered better summers, 2 children were learning the grammar of silence and the syntax of fear. Elena set the note beside her journal, then pressed it flat with her open hand the way one might smooth a wing. Outside, the sky wore an even blue. Sprinklers stitched the lawns with glitter. Somewhere, Mrs. Hanks's voice gossiped to a friend on the phone, a soft saw of sound. It felt obscene that the neighborhood could hum along while a plea sat on a kitchen table a few feet from a plate of cooling bread. Elena took a photograph of the note for her records, wrote the time in her journal, and placed the original into a large manila envelope with the care one gives to fragile artifacts. The envelope seemed to acquire gravity as it filled audio file on a flash drive, time-stamped observations, a map of faint echoes. She did not call this folder Hope. She did not yet have the right. The afternoon softened into a kind of polite warmth. That was when the unmarked sedan rolled into the cul-de-sac, followed 2 minutes later by a patrol car whose restraint felt like choreography. Monica Patel stepped out first, cardigan, neat clipboard held like a promise she had been forced to make many times. Officer Jordan Decker joined her gaze, steady posture, careful. They moved as if they were crossing a stage where everything counted, angle of approach, distance from the threshold, tone of voice. Candace answered with practiced grace, the daylight catching in her hair, her expression calibrated to disarm strangers and reassure onlookers. The door opened just wide enough to frame hospitality, and just narrow enough to control it. From Elena's porch the scene looked almost civil, the kind of interaction that pleased neighborhoods and newsletters. Monica's pen made small noises. Officer Decker nodded in the rhythm of trained neutrality. Candace smiled with her whole face and left nothing at the corners. The chain on the back hallway door remained a rumor because rumors do not hold in court and rumors do not fit into official forms. Minutes gathered and lost their edges. The professionals did their work, and because their work must honor thresholds, they left with notes that were tidy and insufficient. Elena's chest felt hollowed as if someone had reached in and replaced bone with air. The polite closing of the Whitfield's door sounded like the end of a song no one had learned the words to. Across the street, Mrs. Hanks emerged with a watering can and a verdict she delivered to no one in particular. It suggested that some people saw shadows where there were only hedges, that worry could be a hobby, that neighbors should mind their own front steps. The can poured a thin arc of water onto plants that refused to notice the performance. Elena returned to her kitchen with the knowledge that decency, too, could be a costume. Saturday arrived with bunting and the smell of grilled sweetness. The HOA had scheduled a block gathering weeks ago, and now folding tables marched down the sidewalk like temporary altars to harmony. Candace excelled at this kind of liturgy. Her table held frosted cupcakes in perfect rows, napkins folded into rose shapes, and a vase of lilies that pretended innocence. Neighbors admired. Compliments collected. In this light, Candace looked like a woman who sent thank-you notes and remembered birthdays. She asked after people's parents, praised people's dogs, laughed in a way that made Elena feel like she had invented suspicion out of boredom. Even Monica, because professionals are also human, and Saturdays are only sometimes free of cases they cannot fix, was not here to hear the scrape beneath the music. Noah and Lily did not attend. Their absence hung like a missing photograph. Elena stood with a paper cup of lemonade and watched the performance lift and float a carefully stitched hot air balloon, casting shade. Mrs. Hanks, with gentle triumph, told the story of the overzealous neighbor to a pair of newcomers who nodded in the vague, agreeable way of people renting a story by the hour. Elena moved through the small festival without appetite. The roses at her own table wore the day honestly heads heavy with scent. When she reached for a cupcake off Candace's display, she found a note tucked beneath the plate, No words, only a smudge of graphite as if a small hand had tried to write in a hurry and the page had been snatched away. It could have been an accident. It could have been a signal. It stayed with her like grit under a contact lens. Sleep arrived late and shallow. Sometime after 2, the cul-de-sac slid into a deeper quiet, the kind that amplifies weak noises and makes houses confess their creaks. At 1:43 a.m., Elena slipped outside in her slippers and placed a second recorder beneath the bloom-heavy hydrangeas closer to the side wall of the gray house. Ceramic frogs stood guard with comic gravity. The night accepted the device without comment. Inside, Elena waited with the patience of the sleepless. A cooled kettle sat like a relic on the stove. The digital clock hydrated minutes. When she retrieved the recorder at dawn, her hands felt foreign, as if borrowed from a steadier woman. The audio was mostly nothing, and then suddenly a map. At 3:18 a.m., a metallic click. Hinges complaining softly, a strand of air moving across an opening. Small footsteps that did not know how to be quiet anymore because quiet had become another word for fear. A sob shaped by repetition, the worn edge of grief filed down until it fit inside a child's throat without catching. Then a voice, sharp and near, but not clear enough to quote, only clear enough to stain. A slap that sounded more like a decision than an accident. Silence, which is not the absence of sound but the presence of everything that cannot yet be said. Elena labeled the file, copied it to the drive, wrote the time in her journal, and felt the house steady beneath her like a ship reminding its passenger that it had not broken. The sun rose without checking. The sky forgot nothing and announced none of it. Elena brought her folder to Detective Gabriel Morales in a parking lot that smelled of rain held back. He read without commentary. His jaw worked once. The muscle at his temple made a brief statement of its own. He said very little and made a few calls, and his silence felt like action rather than surrender. Back in Willow Creek, the narrative braided itself without her permission. 2 versions of the same cul-de-sac circulated at the speed of friendly conversation. In one, a dedicated mother raised shy children who preferred their books to bounce houses. In the other, a locked door made a basement into a geography test that no one should have to pass. Candace began to trim her hedges in view of everyone, a demonstration of ordinary care. Packages arrived on her porch with cheerful labels for educational toys. A flyer appeared on the HOA board, advertising a parenting workshop she would host: positive discipline, mindful routines, screen time boundaries. The irony was too bright to look at directly. Elena's phone chimed with a call from Maya. The young woman's voice carried concern exhaustion from finals love distilled into questions. Elena edited her answers into gentler versions for her daughter's sake, then stood at the window and watched the gray house wear its new costume. She remembered the theater of her own childhood, the polite table settings, the untouched centerpiece, the crackle in the air that no visitor could name. She found herself cleaning the same countertop twice. She found herself folding a tea towel already folded, then smoothing it once more as if the action could iron the world. She drew a breath and tasted metal. On a weekday afternoon designed for errands, another sedan returned. The second welfare check unfolded with the choreography of the first, but with even more polish from its unwilling star. Candace had a folder ready notes from a pediatrician about growing pains, a photograph of Noah playing with blocks under warm light, a calendar of chore charts decorated with stickers. The basement door, if it existed, did not. The chain, if it had once glinted, seemed now like something Elena had invented out of shadows. Elena stood on her porch because that was what she could do. Monica's face wore the careful neutrality of a person trying to balance urgency with the law's finite reach. Officer Decker kept his posture quiet. They left when their work reached the edge of its authority and could go no further without proof that met a standard the dark has learned to outwit. The cul-de-sac exhaled. A neighbor waved at a delivery truck. A jogger paused to stretch and then continued on headphones, sealing the day into a private rhythm. Across the fence, the gray house closed itself like a book a teacher might call thorough, if not moving. Elena returned to her kitchen and sat with the envelope until the light shifted into evening. The folder looked both too heavy and not heavy enough. She placed the first letter on top, then the flash drive, then her own notes. She locked it all away, not because she had given up, but because she knew the shape of despair and understood that sometimes it needed to be placed in a drawer so that it did not topple the day. When dusk gathered, a small sound stitched the airpaper whispering across wood. Elena opened her door to the sight of an envelope lying exactly on the welcome mat's border, as if precision could make it safer. She felt the world contract to a point. Inside, the handwriting belonged to the same hand that had earlier named the dark. The message did not ask for interpretation. It named immediacy. It used the word forever and meant it the way children mean the words adults fear most. Elena did not narrate her thoughts. She did not rehearse courage. She simply stood up with the letter and the folder and the steadiness that comes when a line has been crossed in a place no one else can see. Somewhere downtown, a brother answered his phone before it finished the first ring. Somewhere in the space between one breath and the next, the story shifted from rumor to alarm. Outside, porch lights blinked on up and down the street, each bulb a small, deliberate star. The gray house did not participate. Behind its curtains, a shape moved and then disappeared into the architecture of hiding. Elena felt the hydrangeas at her side brush her sleeve in the evening wind, as if the garden itself wished to hold her in place long enough to keep her from breaking apart. She went inside and wrote one sentence in her journal. Tonight, the whisper learned how to speak. If you're listening and your heart is tightening, stay with me. Subscribe now so you won't miss what comes next. Some stories turn when the night decides it has heard enough. The evening moved with a deceptive slowness, like honey reluctant to leave its jar. In Willow Creek, porch lights bloomed in predictable sequence, small, warm lanterns fighting the dusk. Everywhere but the gray house. That one stayed dark, its windows veiled its secrets intact. Elena stood at her own window and watched as shadows stitched themselves across lawns. On the table beside her lay the second letter, its edges frayed as if Lily had clenched it too tightly before letting it go. The message was brief and final. She said, "It's forever this time. Please help us." Forever. A word too heavy for a child to carry, yet here it was, balanced precariously in pencil strokes. Elena's hands trembled as she folded the letter and placed it atop the thick manila folder that had become her heart's second pulse. Every page inside was a piece of truth, but truth had limits when the world preferred its illusions tidy. She stared at it and felt something inside her falter. There had been so many signs, so many moments where she had believed that proof would be enough, that if she shouted loud enough someone would come. And yet, doors had closed politely, caseworkers had smiled with professional distance, neighbors had turned their faces away. The garden outside smelled of roses and late summer rain, but Elena could taste only metal and regret. For one terrible breath, she wondered if this was how silence won not through malice but through exhaustion. If she closed her eyes and pretended the gray house did not exist, the world would continue spinning. She could let it. But then she saw Noah's face in her memory, pale and moonlit behind the fence, whispering what no child should ever have to whisper. She thought of Lily's thin arms and the way her handwriting had grown frantic with fear. Elena reached for the folder again. Her fingers steadied. She whispered, "I won't look away." Dessert. Two unmarked vehicles rolled into the cul-de-sac without sirens, without haste. They carried the weight of decisions already made, of conversations spoken in low voices hours earlier. Detective Gabriel Morales emerged first, his expression stripped of everything but purpose. Officer Jordan Decker followed, posture calm but coiled. Monica Patel stepped out last, clipboard in hand, like a shield she no longer trusted. Elena stood on her porch as they approached. The air between them was thick with everything they did not say. Gabe gave her a single nod, the kind that meant both, "We are here and stay back." The group moved toward the gray house. The porch boards under their feet creaked softly, each sound a warning. The front door waited silent, its brass handle reflecting the pale glow of street lamps. When Gabe knocked, it was firm official. 3 measured beats that declared both authority and restraint. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then footsteps hurried but composed, and the porch light flickered to life. Candace appeared in the doorway. Her hair was slightly mussed as if sleep had been staged quickly. Her smile was tight eyes sharp beneath the mask. Gabe's voice was steady as he identified himself and stated their purpose a welfare check standard procedure. Candace's laughter was a brittle thing. She insisted the children were asleep, that they were safe, that waking them would only upset them. Behind her, a shape moved, a blur of pale fabric and small feet. Before anyone could react, Lily burst through the narrow opening, wild with terror. She stumbled across the porch and clutched at Monica's sleeve, sobbing words that cracked open the night. "Please, take us." She locked Owen in the dark again, and I heard him crying. "Please don't leave us." The world narrowed to a single thread. Candace lunged forward, hands grasping, but Gabe intercepted her with a precision born of training and rage carefully leashed. His command to step back cut through the chaos like a blade. Behind the officers, Elena could see past the door at last. The hallway was dim, the chain lock glinting faintly like an accusation. Officer Decker moved inside his flashlight, carving harsh angles into the gloom. The sound of metal meeting metal rang out a key, turning a latch, releasing. Then the door at the end of the hall swung open with a groan that seemed to come from the house itself. From that darkness, a small figure appeared. Barefoot, clad in the thin pajamas, eyes wide and raw. Noah clung to the doorframe as if it were the only thing holding him upright. His gaze found Elena through the open doorway, and in that instant distance vanished. He stumbled forward, not toward the officer, not toward Monica, but toward Elena. She fell to her knees, arms open, and he collapsed against her, breath ragged. "You believed me," he whispered into her shoulder. Elena's tears came silently, fierce and clean. "I'm here now," she breathed. "You're safe." Behind them, chaos rearranged itself. Candace's voice rose in protest that no longer mattered. Monica led Lily gently away. Officers moved with deliberate precision, cataloging evidence, securing the scene. The night shifted from uncertainty to consequence. Inside the basement, the air was thick with mildew and rust. A mattress lay directly on the concrete floor, a single pillow stained and thin. Nearby, a cracked bowl and an empty juice box bore mute testimony. On a shelf, a wooden paddle drilled with small holes waited for hands that would never grip it again. Monica's voice, low and steady, confirmed what Elena had always known: no child should have been here. The children were wrapped in emergency blankets that rustled softly as they moved. Owen clung to Elena even as he was guided toward the waiting car. Lily walked beside Monica, her face streaked with tears and determination. Candace was led away in handcuffs, her mask stripped by the harsh light of duty. She shouted about conspiracies and lies, but no one listened now. The street had chosen its truth. Neighbors peered from behind curtains, their silhouettes stark against the glow of televisions. Some would claim later they had always suspected something. Others would insist they had known nothing at all. Elena didn't look at them. She focused only on the 2 small figures stepping out of the gray house and into the night air. When the car doors closed with a gentle click, Owen pressed his palm to the glass. His eyes met Elena's one last time before the vehicle pulled away, carrying him toward safety. Elena stood in the street long after the cars disappeared, the scent of roses drifting faintly on the breeze. The gray house loomed behind her, silent once more, but no longer secret. If this moment gripped you, if you held your breath alongside Elena and the children, subscribe now so you never miss the stories that need to be heard. Some whispers save lives when they're finally shared. 3 weeks after the night unfastened its chain, a different house held the weight of 2 careful hopes. The Alvarez foster home sat beneath a patient oak on the east side of Portland, its porch painted the color of summer milk. There was a swing that spoke in soft wooden syllables, and a yard permissive enough to let clover bloom where it wished. The first time Elena visited, a basket of folded sweaters waited by the door as if the weather might change and kindness should be ready. The social worker, Monica Patel, with the long breath of someone who has learned to pace, Hope, stood nearby and took unobtrusive notes. She did not interrupt what the day was trying to do. Noah stayed near the threshold, at first one foot set like an anchor on the porch boards, the other edging toward the grass. The sun looked enormous around him. He lifted his hand to his eyes as though brightness had to be negotiated. Lily found the hammock and tested its trust with small, measured sways. She had the posture of a child who had held herself too tightly for too long and was learning the shape of release. On a side table, a ceramic bowl held peaches that smelled like afternoons without clocks. Elena sat on the swing and let the wood say its gentle pieces. She noticed how the air changed around Noah when a firefly drifted up from the hedge, how his attention left the map of exits and floated for a full second after a moving light. The second became 2, then 5. Lily counted the flashes under her breath, a private arithmetic of wonder. When their foster mother brought out cups of lemonade, the ice clicked together and made a rhythm the children had not heard in a long time. Ordinary. Progress arrived wearing small shoes. A night without the ocean roar of panic. A plate cleaned because hunger and safety finally agreed to meet. The emergency blanket replaced by a navy cardigan with sleeves cuffed just right. No speeches were made. None were needed. The day added itself up without calling attention to its sums. Elena memorized the sound of Noah's soft laugh when a ladybug misunderstood the edge of his wrist and kept walking. She wrote it down later with the careful seriousness of a witness. Chapter 18. The Language of Accountability. Courtrooms have their own weather. The air there holds a pressure built from procedure and the daily weight of testimonies. Elena did not like the fluorescence or the hush, but she respected the geometry rows. Aligned oaths, spoken facts placed one after another until a shape emerged. Candace Whitfield took her seat with the remnants of an old performance arranged at the corners of her mouth. It was a thinner mask, one that no longer fit. When the charges were read, the words were clinical, and perhaps that was mercy. Monica testified, first precise in her steps walking the court through reports and timestamps, welfare checks, and thresholds. Officer Jordan Decker spoke next, voice steady, describing the door, the chain, the contents of a basement no one attempted to romanticize. The flash drive with Elena's audio entered the record without drama. The judge listened, eyes lowered as if peering over the edge of a cliff at night. The sound of a latch, the particular timbre of a worn-out cry. These things landed on the lacquered wood like stones sinking into a deep river. The letters Lily had written lay carefully protected in transparent sleeves. The handwriting did what handwriting does. It told the truth without flourish. Elena did not look at Candace while she described the first whisper the way a fence can briefly become the most important place on earth. She kept her voice level. She spoke of roses and the arithmetic of a street that had tried to be polite. She spoke of the difference between silence kept and silence survived. When it ended for the day, there was no triumphant music. The clerk gathered papers, someone coughed, a pen rolled and was retrieved. Still, something in the room had leaned toward consequence. Outside, the Portland sky wore its familiar gray with the generosity of an old sweater. On the courthouse steps, Mrs. Hanks waited awkwardly with a cutting from her garden, an apology grown from stem and thorn. Elena accepted it for what it was, a small thing honestly offered. Protective orders were entered. A no-contact boundary drew its clean line. Accountability had begun not a spectacle, but a function. And though it would move at the speed systems move, the children were already somewhere else, building days that did not require explanation. Chapter 19. The Drawing on the Fridge. Summer drifted toward its softer edge. At the Alvarez house, a workbench appeared in the yard under a shade sail, and a modest project took up residence there, a birdhouse with a doorway painted yellow as a cheerful promise. Lily, precise in intent, dotted small stars along the roofline. Noah pressed his finger into blue paint and made a sky. When Elena arrived for a supervised visit, she found the drawing on the refrigerator held in place by a ladybug magnet. 3 figures stood beneath a sun too large for the paper, which was exactly right. The tallest had gray squiggles for hair. The smallest wore a rectangle of blue. The third figure's arms reached with comic generosity. Along the bottom, in careful letters that did not wobble as much as last month, someone had written 2 words that did not ask for an answer. My hero. Elena let herself feel the weight of it without commentary. Memory approached, but it did not arrive with the old heaviness. She took out her journal that night and wrote about the ways sound changes shape in a safe room. How a cupboard closing becomes only a cupboard closing, not a verdict. How footsteps upstairs are a person moving through their day, not a signal to become invisible. She wrote about her sister Letty and the promise that had taken years to keep. The page did not buckle under the ink. It accepted it. Across the yard, Monica spoke with the foster parents in low, practical tones about therapy schedules and school enrollment and a fall festival that might be fun if approached like a new museum with curiosity and exits marked only as a courtesy, not as a plan. Elena stood with them and listened to the logistics of continued safety. The words were sturdy. They did not need adjectives. Chapter 20. The quiet that stays on a morning brushed with gold. Elena set her phone on the kitchen table and opened a recording app. She had begun speaking stories into it for her grandchildren, for the child she once was, for anyone who might someday need the sound of a stranger's steadiness. The garden outside was busy with ordinary industry. A bee revised its route. A breeze edited the chime to a simpler sentence. She spoke the way audiobooks ask a voice to carry measured, humane, unhasty. She told of a cul-de-sac where lawns were rehearsed and one house refused to sing. She told of a fence that became a confessional of the night when the whisper changed tense and became a cry. She told about professionals who arrive with clipboards because they have to name what is happening before they can change it, and about neighbors who learn how to be neighbors again. She did not repeat the terrible details. The story did not require them. It required an ending that was also a beginning. She let the recording hold a few beats of silence, and for once the quiet was kind. In that quiet, the refrigerator hummed. The drawing fluttered slightly in the air from a vent. The roses outside knocked lightly at the window, as if to be counted present. Across town, in a room with a nightlight shaped like the moon, 2 children woke on their own, not because anyone's footsteps told them to. They chose cereal. They argued about the star stickers for a reading chart that had nothing to do with survival. They laughed at something undeserving, and then laughed again, which is how childhood forgives the world in increments. The gray house on Willow Creek stood with its curtains open for the first time in months. A property manager had raised the blinds and let the dust confess. The porch light, neglected, flickered once and then held steady. The mailbox's dent did not matter. A new tenant would come, someone who preferred basil and window sun, and the rooms would learn a different vocabulary. Elena stepped into her yard and checked the roses for aphids with a practiced glance. She trimmed a single spent bloom and left the rest to open on their own schedule. She was not a hero the way headlines enjoy. She was a citizen of a street, a keeper of a small patch of earth, a woman who had once learned that silence could be a sentence and now knew it could also be a choice. She looked over the fence line that had become a hinge in her life and felt gratitude that hinges exist. Before she ended the recording, she added a final note for the future she could not see. It was not instruction so much as permission. If a quiet house troubles your spirit, trust the part of you that hears what isn't being said. If a small voice brings you an unbearable word, receive it with both hands. The world does not change because we shout. It changes because when someone whispers, somebody listens all the way to the end. She stopped the recording. The file saved with a soft sound, the digital equivalent of a page turning. Outside, a crow argued with a squirrel and lost. The day, having waited politely, began.